The late 1970s was a golden age for synthesizers because suddenly you could buy something that was actually quite cheap and that would function really well. And of course, these early synths are now highly prized. The Roland SH-101, for example, from 1982 to 86, was actually a commercial failure for Roland, but try finding one on eBay for under £1,000. Can't do it. Now, there was a company also that made something called the WASP back in 1978, and it was cheap. It was about £199, which was completely affordable as a thing. And it had a little keyboard that had some touch-sensitive keys, which didn't work so well if you were a bit sweaty during the gig. Now, Behringer have made something based on that original WASP design. Some people called it a clone. Well, it's an instrument in its own right, and it's called the WASP Deluxe. Let's have a look. And here it is. You can see on your screen there's this box here with some cables and some other bits and pieces. Now I'm going to talk a bit about this. And it's actually a very good place to learn how to use synths as well, because it's actually quite basic, but what you can do with it is really, really mega. Now, if I just show you a little bit around this, first of all, we've got the keyboard, we've got a tune control. Now, this is an analog piece of kit, so you have to let it warm up for 10-15 minutes or so that the circuits can settle. I know that sounds a bit old school, but actually it's great having a piece of analog gear. There's no menus, no presets, no nothing, no tempo matching. You just play with it and tweak as you go. Now we've got two oscillators. There's one up here. So we've got an octave selector here, which is named after the sort of organ stop. So you've got a 32-foot organ stop right at the left-hand side, all the way to 2-foot, which is the shortest one. And that basically denotes the octave. Now we've got a width control here, which is for your square wave. So we've got basically 3 different waves. We've got a triangle wave, a square wave, and an ENH, which is kind of an enhanced sort of wave. So it's a bit of a combination. You get a sort of chorusy sound. So let's just have a listen to oscillator 1. At the moment it's off, so let's switch it to triangle. Now, when you use a keyboard, only 3 octaves of the keyboard will work through this, which is kind of what you'd expect for a synth. You wouldn't have a whole range of notes. So 3 octaves is your maximum, but that's absolutely fine. And it's monophonic, so only 1 note at once. Now, if I switch to square wave from triangle, so there's the triangle. There's my square wave now. Basically, what happens with a square wave is if you fiddle with the width control between 50% and 10%, essentially you're changing a bit of the harmonic balance. So you can hear there's a lot of that's a G at the moment. You can hear there's a lot of a D. So that's really, really subtle, but also really creative. Now, if I just go to the ENH control, you'll hear that it sounds a little bit chorusy. So you get quite a nice sort of warm sound through that. Now, the bottom oscillator is a little bit different. You don't have the width control that you had for the square wave in oscillator 1. Instead, you have a pitch control. So that means you can start mixing stuff together and actually change the pitch ever so slightly. So if I just set both to square, so I've got them, well, this one's set to 16 foot, so it's an octave below the top oscillator. Yes, quite enough of that. So we've got triangle waves and a mixer, of course, so I can have either oscillator 1 or oscillator 2. There is also an external control, so you can actually feed audio from elsewhere into this. Now, off the camera here, I've got a clavinet sound on my old Nord Electro rack. Let's see what that sounds like. So there, I've actually plugged the Nord Electro into here, and you can use the filter. Now, I'll come back to the control oscillator in a second. The filter is really the sort of main bit of your synth that you can really control in real time. So if I just go back to the synth, just take the Nord away for a minute. You can essentially have a cutoff frequency that is essentially open at the very right hand side, and pretty much off the other side. We also have a resonance control, so at the frequency that it cuts off, there is a resonant which is 12 dB per octave. And most people know this as the low pass, but you can actually have a high pass as well. Notch filter and a bandpass. There's not much you can't do with this. Now the control oscillator just to the left here, we've got frequency and pitch modulation. What do they do then? Well, I'll show you. Now we have a frequency control, which is essentially the speed of the vibrato. You can also make it control the filter with this control down here in a sine wave, triangle, inverted triangle, square, noise or random. How cool is that? Now the filter control, you can either set it to, so if I do for example, a very slow, so it's rising there, or falling. There's nothing you can't do with this. Now, the envelope generators on the right hand side here. This is kind of the output, if you will. There is one that controls the volume. Now, these are slightly different from the ADSR, that is the attack, decay, sustain and release that you might find on other synths. Instead, we've got a 3-control arrangement here. We've got the attack. Fine, and we all know what that does. That is basically very similar to everything else. The decay control, however, really controls the sustain. So if I just play this, so I'm doing a key here and just releasing. So it's more of a sustain really. Now if I turn the decay up, we have a sustain level as well, which more is what happens when you actually, the sustain is really more of a decay control. So it does take a little bit of getting used to if you've used other synths. Now it's got a handy little repeat control. And a little hold switch as well, so that actually you can play it with no hands at all. It's useful if you're tweaking something maybe and you don't want to hold a key, but essentially that's basically what it is. Now we have a control envelope as well, which is related to this control oscillator here, and also the filter. So if I just turn this up, Behringer in their instruction manual they say play with this control and see what it does. That's kind of where we are with this now. The very last control I've just forgotten on the left hand side is the glide control, or portamento, which basically says how fast it essentially tracks to the next note. When it's minimum, it's literally instantaneous with a note. go. You can basically just set that. Everything's real time. They're really nice control knobs to use. It's very clear. It's very nicely laid out. We've got the MIDI in. I've got MIDI in here from the keyboard. The MIDI out here feeds my Nord Electro rack, which you heard just now with the clavinet sound. We've also got outputs. The oscillators are always present at these outputs here so that you can feed other synths or other filters should you require. So there's a lot going on here. The main audio can be a headphone jack. There is a jack on the back which is either high level, and there's another one for low level. So if you're using a guitar amp, for example, you'd probably use the low level output so that it's basically controllable by the amp. There's no menus on here. Even the MIDI channel is set using little jumper switches on the back, and you can find those on the online manual. So there we are, the Behringer WASP Deluxe, a fantastic sounding synth in every respect.